The road to Camp Lehigh winds through New Jersey farmland in the early light of a summer morning, the kind of road that narrows as it leaves the city behind, trees thickening on either side until the world feels smaller, quieter, and somehow more honest. Steve Rogers sits in the passenger seat of a military transport, his enlistment papers folded inside his jacket pocket, and watches the countryside scroll past. Everything smells of cut grass and diesel fuel. Everything feels like the first page of something. He is, by any reasonable measure, unprepared for what comes next. The camp itself is a sprawl of wooden barracks and dirt roads, a place designed with function and absolutely nothing else in mind. Tents, a parade ground baked hard by weeks of sun, the distant crack of rifle fire from a range somewhere beyond the tree line. Men in uniform move between buildings with the purposeful stride of people who know where they belong. Steve does not yet have that stride. He steps out of the transport, and the humid air hits him immediately, thick and warm, carrying the smell of canvas and boot polish and something vaguely metallic from the mess hall. And standing there, waiting for the new arrivals, is Agent Peggy Carter. She is not what the other recruits expect. You can see it in the way they look at her, the quick glances, the half smiles that suggest they have not yet understood who they are dealing with. Carter stands with her hands clasped behind her back, chin lifted, uniform immaculate, and there is a stillness to her that speaks of authority earned rather than borrowed. She has an accent that places her somewhere in the English countryside, and a bearing that suggests she has already faced down things far more intimidating than a line of young American soldiers. One of those soldiers, a broad, heavy-jawed man named Gilmore Hodge, decides to test this theory almost immediately. As Carter addresses the line, Hodge makes a remark, the kind of remark that men like Hodge make when they encounter a woman in a position of power and feel the need to remind everyone of their own relevance. The words barely finish leaving his mouth before Carter's fist connects with his jaw. It is clean, precise, and final. Hodge stumbles. The other recruits go very, very quiet. Carter straightens her uniform, adjusts her posture by a fraction, and continues as though nothing has happened. Steve, standing at the end of the line, always at the end, always the smallest, watches this with something close to admiration. Not the punch itself, though that was impressive. The refusal to explain it. The way she simply carried on. He will remember this moment later, when everything changes. He will remember that the first person who made him feel like he might belong in this new world was someone who had fought her own way in. Colonel Chester Phillips arrived shortly after. Phillips is a man shaped by decades of military service, stocky, direct, with a voice that carries the particular weariness of someone who has seen too many wars and knows another one is not going to be any different. His eyes sweep the line of recruits with the efficiency of someone checking inventory. When they land on Steve Rogers, they stop. Phillips turns to Erskine. His expression does not need translation. "You're putting your faith in that," Phillips says, and the word "that" carries the full weight of Steve's 95 pounds, his asthma, his crooked spine, every ailment that the Army had previously and repeatedly used as reason to stamp his papers rejected. Phillips does not see potential. He sees a liability, and from where he stands, with the war he needs to fight, you can understand why. But Erskine simply nods. He has his reasons. and those reasons have nothing to do with what Chester Phillips can see from across a parade ground. The days that follow are difficult in the way that physical things are difficult when your body was not built for them. You know this feeling, perhaps. The gap between what you want to do and what your muscles will allow. The frustration of falling behind, not because your will is weak, but because your frame is. Steve runs when the others run. He is always last. His lungs burn within the first quarter mile, and by the halfway point, each breath feels like swallowing something sharp. The other cadets pull ahead of him in a loose, easy pack, and Steve watches their backs grow smaller while his legs turn to something heavy and uncertain beneath him. Sergeant Duffy's voice follows him down the trail, and it is never kind. On the rope climb, Steve's arms give out before he reaches the top. His hands slip on the rough hemp, and he slides back down in a way that is both painful and conspicuous. The rope leaves burns on his palms that he does not mention to anyone. The next morning he tries again. Same result. The morning after that, he wraps his hands in strips of cloth and makes it a few feet higher before the shaking in his arms becomes too much. Under the barbed wire course, the other cadets crawl with their elbows and knees, low and fast, covering the distance in a matter of seconds. Steve gets tangled, not once, but reliably. His slight frame should make this easier, and in theory, perhaps it does, but theory means very little when Hodge kicks at the support structures above, deliberately loosening the wire so that it drops and catches on Steve's back, pressing him flat into the mud. Hodge grins as he passes. Steve does not say anything. He untangles himself slowly and continues crawling. And here's the thing that Phillips misses, and Erskine does not. Steve never stops. The other cadets have better times, stronger results, cleaner scores across every measurable category. But none of them crawl out of the mud and immediately begin again. None of them wrap their bleeding hands and go back to the rope. None of them run the same trails that humiliate them every morning with the same determination every single day. Erskine watches this from a distance, usually, and says nothing. He simply observes, and what he observes confirms what he already knows. One afternoon, Sergeant Duffy takes the cadets on a long run and makes an offer. There is a flag at the top of a flagpole near the end of the route. Take it down, and you earn a ride back to camp. The cadets break into a sprint, converging on the pole with the competitive desperation of young men who have been running for miles in the heat. They leap at it, scramble up it, Hodge throwing himself at the smooth metal with brute force that accomplishes nothing at all. One after another, they slide back down, hands squeaking against the pole, legs wrapped uselessly around its base. The flag hangs at the top, limp in the still air, utterly indifferent to their efforts. Steve arrives last, of course. He is breathing hard, his face flushed, sweat darkening his collar. He watches the other cadets grapple with the pole for a moment, and then he does something that none of them have considered. He walks to the base of the flagpole, bends down, and removes the support pin. The pole tilts, hesitates, and then falls gently to the grass with a soft, final thud. Steve picks up the flag, folds it, and hands it to Sergeant Duffy. The other cadets stand there in the sudden quiet, hands still raw from climbing, and try to understand what just happened. Steve gets his ride back to camp. He sits in the back of Peggy Carter's Jeep, the flag on his lap, and Carter glances at him in the rearview mirror with something that is not quite a smile, but is very close to one. It is the first time Steve has been ahead of anyone in this camp, and it happened because he thought about the problem differently. Because when strength was not an option, he found another way. Still, Phillips remains unconvinced. In his office, with maps spread across his desk, and the weight of the war pressing down on every decision, Phillips argues his case to Erskine. Hodge is the better choice. Hodge is bigger, faster, more physically suited. Hodge follows orders. Phillips does not need cleverness. He needs a soldier who can carry the serum's gifts into combat and use them to win. Erskine listens patiently. He has heard this argument before, in different accents, from different men. The assumption is always the same, that the strongest body makes the best vessel, that power should go to the powerful. It is a reasonable assumption, and it is wrong, and Erskine knows exactly how wrong it is, because he has seen what happens when it proves true. Hodge is a bully, Erskine says quietly, and Phillips waves this away, because bullies win wars, or at least that has been his experience. But Erskine is not finished. Not yet. The grenade test happens on an ordinary afternoon. The cadets are assembled, Phillips is watching, and everything seems routine, until a grenade arcs through the air and lands among the soldiers with a metallic bounce. In the half-second that follows, and it is barely a half-second, barely enough time for thought to become action, every single cadet scatters. They run. Hodge, the man Phillips believes should carry the serum, runs fastest of all. His long legs carry him away from the grenade with the pure, undiluted instinct of self-preservation. Steve Rogers does not run. Instead, he does the only thing that makes sense to a person whose first instinct is not survival, but protection. He throws himself onto the grenade, curling his small body around it, wrapping himself over the metal casing as tightly as he can. One arm reaches out, waving the others back. "Get away," he shouts. "Stay back." He closes his eyes and waits for something that does not come. The grenade is a dummy. The explosion never arrives. Steve lies there for a moment, breathing hard against the dirt, and then slowly uncurls. He looks up at Phillips. Phillips looks back at him, and in that look, something shifts. Not warmth, not approval exactly, but the grudging recognition that Erskine might have been right about something Phillips did not want to admit. Phillips relents. He does not do so gracefully, but he does it. And Erskine, watching from the side, allows himself the smallest moment of satisfaction. That evening, the camp settles into the particular quiet that comes after a day of hard work and dust and decisions that cannot be undone. The barracks are warm with the residual heat of the day, and the sounds are the small sounds of men winding down, the clink of mess kits being cleaned, the murmur of low conversation, the creak of bunk springs. Steve sits alone on his bunk, and the room feels emptier than it should. Tomorrow, everything changes. Tomorrow, he becomes something else. The thought sits in his chest like a stone, and he does not know whether it is excitement or fear, or some mixture of the two that does not yet have a name. A knock at the door. Erskine enters carrying a bottle and 2 glasses, and there is something in the way he moves, unhurried, deliberate, that suggests this visit has been planned for longer than it might appear. They talk, and the conversation that follows is one you should hold gently in your mind, because it matters. It matters more than the procedure, more than the serum, more than anything that will happen in the morning. Erskine pours a drink and tells Steve why he was chosen. Not the official reasons, not the physical data or the psychological evaluations. The real reasons, the ones that do not fit on a form. He tells Steve about Johann Schmidt. Schmidt was the first person to receive the serum back in Germany when Erskine still believed that science could be separated from the men who wielded it. Schmidt was ambitious, intelligent, driven, all the qualities that military leaders prize, all the qualities that Phillips sees in Hodge. And the serum took those qualities and amplified them, just as it was designed to do. But here is what Erskine learned, and what he carries with him now like a scar. The serum does not merely enhance the body, it amplifies what is inside. It takes whatever a person truly is, their deepest nature, their most fundamental self, and makes it more. In Schmidt's case, that inner nature was ambition, vanity, a hunger for power that respected no boundary. The serum took those things and turned them monstrous. The man who emerged from Schmidt's procedure was no longer quite a man at all. Erskine pauses. The room is very quiet. The serum amplifies everything that is inside, he says. Good becomes great. Bad becomes worse. And this is why Steve Rogers was chosen. Not because he is strong, he is not. Not because he is fast or tall, or any of the things that Chester Phillips values. He was chosen because of what is inside him. Because a lifetime of weakness has taught him something that strong men never learn. A weak man knows the value of strength, Erskine says, and knows compassion. Let those words settle. They are perhaps the most important words anyone will ever say to Steve Rogers. They are the reason he is here. Not the grenade, not the flagpole, not any single act of cleverness or courage. It is this, that power, real power, should go to the person least likely to abuse it. The person who knows what it is to be small. The person who will never forget what it felt like to be pushed down, and who will therefore never push others down in turn. Steve listens, and he understands, and the weight in his chest shifts from fear to something more like responsibility. Erskine reaches for the bottle to pour Steve a glass, then stops himself, remembering. No liquids before the procedure. He pulls the glass back with a slight smile, then pours one for himself instead. I can have a drink, he says, with the warmth of a man who has earned his small pleasures. I will drink for the both of us. They promise each other then. After the procedure, they will share that drink properly. A toast between two men who chose each other. Erskine choosing Steve for the serum. Steve choosing to trust Erskine with his body. It is a small promise, made easily in a warm room at the end of a long day. The kind of promise that should be simple to keep. Remember it, because it will not be kept. The morning arrives with the kind of brightness that feels deliberate, as though the city itself knows something is about to happen. Steve and Peggy Carter drive through New York together, and the car moves through streets that Steve knows by heart. Every block, every corner, every alleyway. He points out landmarks as they pass, not the famous ones, not the ones that tourists photograph. He points to a narrow gap between two buildings on the Lower East Side. I got beaten up in that alley, he says. Then, a few blocks later, gesturing to the entrance of a parking lot. And behind that diner. Then a side street near a laundromat. Then a loading dock behind a grocery store. The geography of Steve Rogers' youth is mapped not in parks and schools, but in the places where he was knocked down, and the quiet fact that he keeps pointing them out says something important. He is not ashamed. He is not bitter. He is simply telling the truth about who he is and where he has been, with the honesty of someone who has nothing left to pretend about. Carter listens, and then she shares something of her own. She tells Steve about being a woman in the military, about the men who looked past her, the ones who looked through her, the ones who assumed she was someone's secretary until she proved otherwise. She tells him about the particular exhaustion of being underestimated every single day, and the way it wears you down, not in great dramatic collapses, but in small, steady erosions. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, if you like. They are, in this moment, two people who understand each other in a way that most people never will. Both have spent their lives being told that they are not enough. Both have kept going anyway. The car moves through the city, and the morning light catches the buildings and turns them gold. And if you had been sitting in the back seat, you might have felt something shift between these two people. Not romance, not yet, but the quieter thing that comes before it. Recognition. The understanding that someone else has walked a road very much like yours. The car stops outside an antique bookshop in Brooklyn, an ordinary-looking storefront with faded lettering above the door and a window display of old volumes that nobody has rearranged in months. Carter leads Steve inside, where an elderly woman stands behind the counter with the practiced disinterest of someone who has been doing this particular job for a very long time. Carter gives a code phrase. The woman nods. And then the bookcase, the entire bookcase, floor to ceiling, heavy with the weight of old paper and dust, swings open to reveal a corridor of polished concrete and bright fluorescent light. The transition is startling. One moment, you're in a shop that smells of leather and age, and the next you are stepping into a facility that hums with electricity and purpose. Steve follows Carter through the corridor and into the main laboratory, and the room that opens before him is vast. Banks of machinery line the walls, cables thick as a man's arm snake across the floor, and overhead lights cast everything in a clinical white glow. Scientists in lab coats move between stations, checking instruments, adjusting dials. The air itself feels charged, as though the machines have been warming up for hours, and the room has absorbed their energy. Every head turns when Steve walks in. He is used to being looked at. He has been looked at his whole life, in recruiting offices, in back alleys, on the streets of Brooklyn. But those looks were dismissive, pitying sometimes. These looks are different. These people are looking at him the way you might look at a seed before it goes into the ground, with expectation, with the understanding that what stands before them now is not what will stand before them in an hour's time. Abraham Erskine greets him warmly. Howard Stark, brilliant, restless, already halfway through a sentence before he finishes his first, preps the machinery with the quick, confident hands of a man who builds things the way other people breathe. Above the laboratory floor, behind a thick glass observation window, Chester Phillips sits alongside senators and generals in their dress uniforms. They have come to watch their investment pay off. Steve is guided to the Rebirth pod. It stands in the center of the laboratory, like a metal coffin turned upright, its interior lined with mechanisms that Steve does not pretend to understand. He removes his shirt, The contrast between his body and the machine is almost comical. This narrow-shouldered, sunken-chested man standing beside a device that looks like it could launch a rocket. He lies down inside. The metal is cool against his back. Erskine addresses the room. His voice is steady, calm, carrying the measured confidence of a scientist who has spent years arriving at this exact moment. He explains what Project Rebirth will do. He explains what it means. And then, when the speeches are over and the generals have settled into their seats, Erskine turns back to Steve. A needle slides into Steve's arm. He winces, his face tightening against the sting. "That wasn't so bad," he says, more to himself than anyone else. Erskine smiles gently. "That was just penicillin." A small laugh ripples through the laboratory. Steve swallows. The moment of lightness passes quickly. What comes next is not light. Erskine counts down. His hand rests on Steve's shoulder. A small gesture, easy to miss if you are watching from the observation gallery, but Steve feels it. The warmth of it. The steadiness. It is the last gentle thing that will happen for a while. The super soldier serum enters Steve's bloodstream through multiple injection points, and the pain is immediate. Not the sharp, clean pain of a needle, but something deeper, something that seems to reach into the architecture of his cells and begin rearranging. Steve's jaw clenches. His hands grip the sides of the pod. The serum moves through him like a tide, and everywhere it reaches, something fundamental begins to change. Erskine signals stark, and the pod closes around Steve, encasing him in the chamber. The machinery lifts him upright. Through the small window of the pod, Steve's face is visible, pale, tight with pain, but his eyes are open. He is still present. He is still here. Then the Vita radiation begins. Imagine warmth, not the warmth of sunlight or a fire, but something that starts beneath the surface of your skin and radiates inward, deeper and deeper, until it reaches the center of you. Imagine that warmth becoming heat, and the heat becoming something that has no name, a sensation that is not quite pain and not quite anything else, but is vast and total and all-consuming. The machines around the pod glow with an intensity that makes the scientists shield their eyes. The hum of the generators deepens into something you feel in your chest, rather than hear with your ears. Steve screams. The sound fills the laboratory. It rises above the hum of the generators, above the click and whir of Stark's instruments, above the murmured conversations of the generals behind their glass. It is the sound of a body being taken apart at its most fundamental level and rebuilt, and it is the kind of sound that makes everyone in the room go very still. Erskine's hand moves towards the kill switch. "Shut it down," someone says. Peggy Carter steps forward, her face drawn with concern, and through the pain, through the sound, and the heat and the light, Steve's voice reaches them. "Keep going." 2 words, barely more than a gasp, but they carry the same stubbornness that kept him crawling under barbed wire, kept him running trails that broke him every morning, kept him standing up in every alley where he was knocked down. Steve Rogers does not quit, not even now, not even when his body is being remade from the inside out. Stark glances at Erskine. Erskine nods. The procedure continues. The light intensifies. The sound deepens, and something inside the pod changes. When it is over, and it ends not with a bang, but with a slow, gradual dimming, the generators winding down like a held breath being released. The laboratory is very quiet. The pod opens. Steam curls from the edges. soft and pale in the fluorescent light. And the man who steps out is not the man who stepped in. Steve Rogers stands 6 feet 2 inches tall. His shoulders are broad, his chest full, his arms thick with new muscle that still seems to surprise him every time he moves. He weighs 240 pounds, and every ounce of it is dense, functional, alive. The asthma is gone. The scoliosis is gone. The heart murmur, the partial deafness, the color blindness, all of it erased, as though his body has been rewritten by someone who read the original draft and decided it deserved better. He blinks in the light. The room swims around him. People are moving, speaking, but the sounds are strange and new because his ears work differently now. Everything is clearer, sharper, more. Peggy Carter is the first to reach him. She stops in front of him, looking up because she has never had to look up at Steve Rogers before. And there is something in her face that is equal parts wonder and something gentler, something that recognizes the person still inside this new body. "How do you feel?" she asks. Steve looks down at himself, at his hands, which are larger than they were an hour ago, at his arms, which he does not quite recognize as his own, at the world, which seems somehow different from 2 inches higher than he has ever seen it. "Taller," he says, and Carter, despite everything, almost smiles. The room erupts. Scientists crowd around. Generals descend from the observation gallery. Howard Stark examines his instruments with the focused delight of a man whose invention has exceeded his own expectations. Senator Brandt is already talking about what this means for the war, already calculating the political value, already imagining the headlines. In the noise and the movement and the celebration, Abraham Erskine stands slightly apart, watching Steve with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose faith has been justified. He has waited years for this moment. He has carried the weight of Schmidt's failure, the guilt of what his science created when it was placed inside the wrong man. And now, finally, he has seen it placed inside the right one. This is the moment that should have been the beginning. Instead, it is the end. The gunshot comes from somewhere in the gallery, a sharp, flat sound that cuts through the celebration like a blade. Erskine staggers. His hand goes to his chest, and when it comes away, it is red. He looks at Steve, finds Steve's eyes across the room, and in the time it takes for his legs to fail him, for his body to fold to the laboratory floor, Abraham Erskine raises his hand and points. He points to Steve's heart. "Remember our conversation," the gesture says. "Remember what I told you. Remember why you were chosen. Remember that the serum amplifies what is inside, and what is inside you is good. Remember that. Whatever happens next, whatever you become, remember." Steve catches him as he falls, holds him, and watches the light leave the eyes of the man who believed in him when no one else did. The drink they promised to share sits unopened on a table in an empty barracks room. It will never be poured. What follows is a blur of noise and movement. Heinz Kruger, the assassin, fighting through guards, seizing the last remaining vial of serum, shattering a window, running. And Steve, still adjusting to a body he has owned for less than 10 minutes, running after him. If you had been standing on a New York street that morning, you might have seen a strange sight. A tall, shirtless man sprinting barefoot down the block at a speed that seemed impossible. His movements too fast, but also somehow wrong, as though he had not yet learned the dimensions of his own stride. You might have seen him misjudge a corner and crash through a shop window, glass cascading around him, and then heard him call out an apology over his shoulder as he kept running. You might have noticed that despite the chaos, despite the fear and the grief driving him forward, Steve Rogers still said sorry for breaking someone's window. That is who he is. Even now, even in this. The chase ends on a dock, and it ends badly. Kruger smashes the last vial of serum on the ground. The liquid spreads across the wood and soaks into nothing. Then Kruger bites down on a capsule hidden in his tooth, and his body stiffens, and he drops. Cyanide. Hail Hydra. Dead before anyone can ask him a single question. Steve stands on the dock, breathing hard, and the city sounds come back to him slowly. Traffic, gulls, the slap of water against pilings. The vial is shattered. Erskine is dead. The formula exists nowhere except in Steve's blood, and that blood is not something that can be replicated. The science that made him is gone. He is the only one. He will always be the only one. In the days that follow, there are blood draws and examinations and meetings held in rooms where Steve is not invited. Scientists try to reverse engineer the serum from his samples. They fail. Chester Phillips looks at Steve and sees not an army, but a single man. Impressive, yes, but not what he was promised. Phillips wanted soldiers, plural. What he has instead is a symbol, and symbols do not win wars. Or so he believes. Steve asks to be sent to the front. Phillips refuses. "You're not enough," he says, and the words land harder than they should because Steve has heard them before, in different voices, his entire life. But Senator Brandt sees something else. Brandt sees a man who chased down a Hydra agent through the streets of New York in broad daylight. He sees a story. He sees a face that can sell war bonds. And so Steve Rogers, the man who threw himself on a grenade, who earned a scientist's faith, who survived a procedure that was never meant to happen more than once, is given a costume, a script, and a stage name. Captain America. The costume is bright, red, white, and blue, with a star on the chest and a caul that covers his ears. It is designed not for combat, but for visibility, not for war, but for performance. It looks, if you are being honest, slightly ridiculous, but it photographs well, and in 1943, that is what matters. The show is built around him. Music, dancers, a chorus line of women in matching outfits, and at the center of it all, Steve Rogers, now Captain America, delivering scripted lines about buying war bonds to audiences of families and children in cities across America. The centerpiece of the act is a moment where Steve punches a man dressed as Adolf Hitler, and the crowd cheers every night. And every night Steve throws the punch and smiles and waves and feels a little less like himself. He is, in every way that matters, a performing monkey. But the audiences love him, children especially. They line up after the shows with their mothers, eyes wide, holding out programs and comic books for him to sign. Captain America comic books appear on newsstands. Bright, bold, hand-drawn adventures in which a fictional version of Steve storms beaches and defeats Nazis with a single punch. Movie serials follow, projected in cinemas across the country, showing Captain America as a square-jawed hero in situations that bear no resemblance to anything Steve has actually experienced. The comics are shipped overseas, to soldiers in France, to children in England, to anyone who needs a reason to believe that the good guys are winning. And Steve signs the autographs, and he poses for the photographs, and he lifts a motorcycle with 3 dancers balanced on it at the end of every show, because that is what the finale requires. The crowds gasp and applaud. Brant stands in the wings and beams. The war bond numbers climb. Back in his dressing room, Steve sits alone. The costume hangs on a rack beside the mirror, and in the mirror, he sees a body that is everything he ever wanted, and a face that is not sure what it has become. He has the strength of 10 men. He could run through a wall. He could leap from a moving vehicle and land without a scratch. And instead, he punches a fake Hitler 6 nights a week and twice on Saturdays. Somewhere across the ocean, real soldiers are fighting a real war. Men are dying in mud and snow and darkness. And Steve Rogers, the man who jumped on a grenade to save strangers, is selling war bonds in a costume that makes him look like a flag. The distance between what he is and what he does grows wider with each passing week. It is a quiet kind of loneliness, the kind that lives in the gap between purpose and performance. Steve fills his days with travel and shows and meet and greets, and at night he lies in hotel rooms that all look the same and stares at ceilings that all look the same and feels the restless, unspent energy of a body built for something it has never been allowed to do. November 1943, Italy. The air is different here, colder, thinner, carrying the faint smell of smoke from fires that were not lit for warmth. Steve stands on a makeshift stage in front of an audience of active duty soldiers, and he knows within the first 30 seconds that this is not going to go well. These men have seen combat. They have buried friends. They have spent weeks in foxholes and field hospitals, and they have absolutely no patience for a man in a bright costume telling them to buy war bonds. Steve begins his routine, the lines, the gestures, the rehearsed enthusiasm, and the response is silence, then murmuring, then from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, a voice he recognizes. Gilmore Hodge, the same Hodge who ran from the grenade, the same Hodge who kicked the barbed wire down onto Steve's back. Hodge is here, in the audience, and he is heckling. The words are crude and loud, and they carry the particular cruelty of a man who resents the fact that Steve is standing on a stage at all. Other soldiers join in. They do not want Captain America. They want the chorus girls. They make this abundantly clear. Steve stands under the lights and feels something drain out of him. Not energy, not confidence, but something more fundamental. The belief that what he is doing has meaning. He finishes the show, barely, and then he walks off the stage and finds a quiet spot behind the camp, away from the noise and the people, and he sits on an ammunition crate and takes out his sketchbook. He draws himself, a monkey in a Captain America costume dancing on a stage, tin cup in hand. The lines are quick and clean. Steve has always been a good artist, and he captures something in the sketch that he could never say out loud. The absurdity of it, the sadness, the sense of being exactly where he does not belong. This is where Peggy Carter finds him. She sits beside him, and for a moment neither of them speaks. The camp is quieter now. Somewhere nearby, a generator hums. The distant sound of men talking reaches them as a low murmur, indistinct and constant, like water over stones. Carter looks at the sketch and does not comment on it. She does not need to. Instead, she tells Steve something he needs to hear, even if he is not ready to hear it. She tells him that he was meant for more than this. She reminds him of Erskine, of the conversation before the procedure, of the reason Steve was chosen. She tells him that if Erskine could see him now, performing on a stage, selling bonds, punching a man in a Hitler costume, Erskine would not have recognized the purpose. That Steve sounds like Brant when he tries to defend what he is doing. That the man Erskine chose was not meant to be a symbol on a poster. He was meant to be something real. Steve listens. The sketchbook rests on his knee, open to the drawing of the monkey. The camp grows quieter still, and somewhere inside him, beneath the costume and the weariness and the months of performing for people who do not see him, something begins to shift. Not yet a decision, not yet a plan, but the first stirring of a restlessness that will not go away. He does not know it yet, but across this camp, wounded soldiers are arriving from the front. Among the regiments listed as missing or destroyed, there is a number that Steve will recognize, the 107th. And within the 107th, there is a name that will change everything. But that is a story for another time. For now, in this moment, Steve Rogers sits in the fading light of an Italian evening, his sketchbook in his lap, his costume folded in a duffel bag beside him, and he waits. He has the body of a soldier and the life of an entertainer, and the distance between those two things has become a kind of ache that settles in quietly, the way the cold does, and stays. The camp sounds soften around him. The hum of the generator becomes a kind of breathing. The voices in the distance thin and fade, and the sky above northern Italy deepens from gray to something darker and more gentle, the first stars beginning to show through gaps in the cloud cover, like small, patient lights left on for someone who has not yet come home. Steve closes his sketchbook. He rests his hands on his knees and breathes, and the air is cool and clean and carries nothing with it. No cheering, no music, no scripted lines, just silence and the knowledge that somewhere out there, beyond the hills and the darkness, there is a war that needs him. Not Captain America, not the dancing monkey, or the poster boy, or the man who punches a fake Hitler every night. Him, Steve, the kid from Brooklyn who jumped on a grenade because it was the right thing to do. He is still waiting, but not for much longer. Continuity. Note. He is still waiting, but not for much longer. Steve closes his sketchbook in the fading Italian evening, alone behind the camp, carrying the body of a soldier and the life of an entertainer, and the quiet, growing certainty that somewhere beyond the hills there is a war that needs him.